Greetings, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Mike Nelson. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the Windows Sandbox. Does anybody here use Sandbox today? Awesome. Like 4 or 5 of you. I thought there'd be more. Interesting. How many of you have ever heard of the Windows Sandbox? Okay, there are still people that didn't put their hands up. That's interesting. So real quickly, I'll just tell you, Windows Sandbox has been in a feature of Windows 10. Build 20 something. And what it is basically a virtual environment that you're allowed to spin up and, beat it up, crash it, do whatever you like to it, because when you spin it up again, it's a brand new image. And it comes up pretty instantaneously. So I'll get through that. I've got a couple slides, only 4, maybe 5, 4, I think. And then the rest is all going to be shown. So thank you to our sponsors. Thank you very much. Really appreciate this. Really appreciate being able to speak this year. This is me. I'm a technical evangelist at Pure Storage. So if you ever need to get a hold of me, you can get a hold of me at the Twitter and the GitHub. Twitter, not so much anymore, but you can see I'm a scripter. So anybody in here a coder? A real diehard dev? C#? Back to the maybe COBOL? No, nothing? Okay, good. Because like it says, I'm not a coder. I couldn't really, code much, but I am a scripter. So for those of you who saw my session yesterday, you're going to see this again. I apologize, but I want everyone to know where Wisconsin is. Does anybody know where Wisconsin is in the U.S.? It's actually right up borders up there in Canada. Yes, it's very cold during the 3.5 months out of the year that it's warm. And we're really famous for cows. We got a lot of cows. And with that cows comes our beer, which is our Spotted Cow beer, which is like the most popular beer, one of the most top 10 popular beers in the United States for some reason. I have no idea why, because it really doesn't taste that good, but it is what it is. Yeah, well, yeah, I'll give you that. And along with cows, of course, dairy, we have cheese curds. We have to have cheese curds. We're very famous for those. And this is actually a picture of one of the houses that's not too far away from me on the lake. This is what it looks like when we get an ice storm off the lake. A huge, I call it a Lake Michigan, which is the largest body of water in the U.S. And then, of course, American football. Not European football, but American football, the Green Bay Packers, if you've ever heard of those. That's actually, that stadium and that legacy and everything is about 30 minutes away from where I live. So that's where I'm from. All right. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to be talking about a lot of stuff. The first thing I want to talk about is some of the things that I want to get across. I'm not going to go and do this like a textbook type of session, go step by step on stuff, and things like that. I want this to be more free-flowing and actually showing you what this can do. So the first thing you need to know is if you use Windows Sandbox, if you've never used it before, and you're going to use it, it can break things, okay? And the reason why is because it had incompatibilities with VirtualBox and with KVM and some other hypervisors. But they've actually, VirtualBox has actually fixed that, okay? So the latest release, it no longer crashes. So it's kind of like hit or miss, depending on when they come out with a release. When the other, hyperscalers or hypervisors come out with a release, it all depends if they're actually going to work. But you have to be cautious because it could break something that you already have. So I encourage you to try it. Hopefully you can try it on a system that, is something that is not mission critical or business critical for you. But it should run, flawlessly. I've never broken anything. I do know of someone that had VirtualBox, a very old version, because they had to run an old version for specific reasons, and it did break it. So the sandboxes are virtual containers, and they're actually based off of a very small, tiny image that was codenamed Madrid. And we're actually going to take a look at the base layer, the base image, and what it is it's an image that's layered. So there are things that are put, on top of it and brought down when you actually deploy the sandbox itself. They are extremely lightweight. Literally, you can stick them on a little, 1 gig USB stick if you wanted to and give them to someone else. The actual base image. Now, if you add things to that image while you're working on them, then obviously, or create your own, then obviously it's going to be bigger. Another thing is around networking. So networking is, everything's host-based. Except for some reason, Microsoft has Edge, not host-based. It's actually using the host file inside of the sandbox. I can't figure this out for the life of me, why they do this. But everything else relies on the host networking. The DNS, the name servers, everything, the host files. And if you do anything inside of a sandbox that requires that type of networking, then you're going to want to look at the host rather than the actual sandbox. All right. So now that I've gone through those and I've kind of said, hey, these are the pluses, not really, well, a couple minuses, but what it's used for. Can anybody tell me why you'd want to use Sandbox? Anybody that uses it maybe? Why you use it? What do you use it for? Okay, yep, for patches. Yeah. What else? Anybody else use it? Yeah.
Investigating possible malicious links from spam filtering.
That's originally why it was created. It really was. It was really originally created for ransomware, malware, and things like that. And what you'll see here in a moment is how it actually was, it evolved, how it was born. But I have to ask the actual expert who's sitting in the front row here, what do you use it for, Jeff?
I use it to test installation of apps and modules without polluting my main system.
Yep, that's exactly. That's why I use, yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Jeff says that he actually uses it to test modules and other things that he's creating so he doesn't pollute his main, laptop, his main OS.
As a pristine environment.
Yes, as a pristine environment. Correct. That's another good point, is that it is a pristine environment, which means that if you put something inside of there and you're testing it with the base core of Windows, nothing else. I mean, you'll actually see, or if you run it on your laptops, if you have your laptops open, you'll actually see that there's very limited functionality within the sandbox. That's why they make it customizable so you can add to it. All right. There is actually a couple other uses, but I'll get to those when I'm showing you the demos when we go through those. All right. So this is actually what it looks like. You'll see here you have the host file system. Okay, so if you have a file 1, 2, 3, and 4, it creates a dynamic image, which basically takes file 1, but it links to everything else. Okay, so it's actually not using the full file. It's just linking to them, which makes that, incredibly small footprint. And everything on 2, 3, and 4 is immutable. So there's nothing that can be written to those, but everything else can be written to. Okay? Now, does anybody know what WDAG is? Anybody heard of WDAG? Anybody heard of MDAG? Shout it out if you have. No? Yes. Yes. What kind of application guard, though? Yeah, actually. So the story is that Windows Defender, okay, this is Windows Defender Application Guard, WDAG. Now, WDAG was actually a product that was brought out. It was a while ago. It was called codename Barcelona, but it was actually brought out many, many years ago. It was something that Microsoft was kind of hibernating for a very long time. WDAG eventually, produced the Sandbox. It allowed the Sandbox to be put into Windows 10 at the time. And then now, this is more recently, I think within the last year or so, they've changed the name now to Microsoft. Everything's changing the names to Microsoft rather than Windows. But it's Microsoft's Defender Application Guard. And part of that reason is because they're actually expanding this into Office 365. Or M365 now. I apologize. It's Microsoft 365. So you're going to have Application Guard for 365 apps along with, the local desktop apps as well. So that's how Sandbox actually came to be. And you'll see when you open up a Sandbox and you go in and look at the user that's actually you're running as in a Sandbox, you'll see that history because that's the user. The MDAG is the user, or the WDAG. Just a quick overview of what it actually looks like from a diagramming point of view, if you will. The biggest thing I want to point out here is that you do have the hypervisor that sits at the base layer, but everything for Sandbox is going to be in what they call the CM service, or the Container Manager service. And then they'll have the Hyper-V host compute service, and then the virtual machine worker processes. Okay, so there are a couple of things that have to be running on your machine in order to get the Sandbox to be produced. And just going in and the control panel and features, and then checking the box to enable Windows Sandbox, or using the PowerShell to enable the optional feature, that's turning all of this on and setting all this up. Now, it should be noted that this is not just for Sandbox. This is for any Windows container. Okay, so Sandbox is just one of the containers you can run. There are a whole bunch of other Windows containers that Microsoft has created out there in the ecosystem, themselves and the ecosystem, that you can run on your desktop. Okay, so it manages both. All right. So the other point I wanted to make about this before I move on is on the hypervisor side. You'll notice that it says hypervisor plus kernel components. The kernel doesn't have a lot of play here except for redirecting hardware calls. Okay, so, and by hardware calls, I mean like file system calls, memory calls, things like that. It's really not, you're not touching the original Windows kernel or NT kernel, if you will. So it's nothing to be worried about in terms of from a security aspect. I will point out an actual article that was done, if you're familiar, I don't know how, I'm not worldwide, Checkpoint Software. Checkpoint Software did a really in-depth evaluation of the Sandbox, and I'll show you that in a moment. This right here is actually just pointing out how everything communicates, like I said. You'll notice that the hypervisor is sitting at the bottom, but you're in user mode or kernel mode. And it's not really doing a lot in terms of on the kernel mode side, except communicating. There's a lot of communication going on, but it's not like changing a lot of stuff. Okay? And it's very well documented in the Checkpoint article that I'll show you. And, of course, all of this will be available in the PSConf 2023 GitHub repo when I get it a PR up there to put it up there. I don't think there's anything else on this slide I really wanted to point out. Oh, yeah, there is. I'm sorry. In the right-hand corner, you'll see that you have a base layer of VHDX and you have a Sandbox VHDX. Okay? Everything inside of the Sandbox is a VHDX. Okay? Except for when you start the CM service, it expands that VHDX. Okay? So I'll show you that. But they're still working with VHDXs because it's Hyper-V, right? I don't know how many people in here use Hyper-V. Oh, cool. So somebody knows about it. All right. We're not all VMware, huh? All right. Cool. Okay. So I'm going to get right to demos here. All right. So the first thing I want to show you is, well, I want to step back a second. I want to talk about the things that I said I was going to mention, the other uses for the Sandbox. So one of the things is being able to take an image, okay, a clean, pristine image, install what you want onto it, and then be able to like deploy it to multiple people. All right, because it's just running as a Sandbox inside of their OS. It's not actually taking over their OS. They don't have to install anything. It's not like a VM, okay? Because a VM you have to install the hypervisor layer, right? You got to install Fusion, or you got to install VMware Workstation, or you got to install KVM, or whatever, Parallels. I don't know whatever you use. But with the Sandbox, you don't have to do that, okay? Now, it does only run in Windows, right? So if they have another OS, then, that's the way it is. But think about the possibilities for that. I know a company that actually uses a sandbox for e-learning. Okay, so they have e-learning, especially with the pandemic, with COVID, sending out actual sandboxes to people, to the trainers, to be able to work off of a pristine image. And that's all they trained off of, everything that was inside that image. They never had to put anything on their own machine. So it was very easy to do that. That just kind of opens up the book. I just wanted to get that out there because besides just being from an aspect of security and, pen testing and malware and ransomware, there are a lot of other uses for it. All right. So if we take a look at, I'm just in a regular PowerShell session here. If we take a look at, start off with the actual files. So with the Windows Sandbox, if you're not familiar with it, I'll just launch an instance here real quick. And you can do that a couple of different ways. You can have an icon on your desktop, obviously, or you can just type Windows Sandbox. And it will launch, and you'll see how quickly this comes up. So in a matter of seconds here, I think the longest it's ever taken is, obviously depending on your host, but I think the longest it's ever taken for me to launch something is it's under 20 seconds for it to come up. And if I'm installing things, as part of a flow or as part of, being able to add things, then obviously it takes longer. But right now you have an operational Windows 11 environment right here. And you can go in and you can run Explorer, you can run Edge, it gives you a very limited set of applications that you can use. Like I said, it's very lightweight. So as you go down here, there isn't a lot there, even from the system tools standpoint. You do have PowerShell. You do have the command prompt. PowerShell obviously is the 5.1. It is not not version 7 or above. And the other aspect of this is that, as if you saw, we're looking at the diagram. I know it was kind of messy, but if you looked at the diagram, it actually showed you the ability to bring in audio and be able to do video. So this does allow for virtual GPUs, and it does allow for audio. And you'll also notice in the right-hand corner there, it also passes battery. So if you're running on a laptop, which is really kind of critical because if you're using it for some reason, doing training or doing something like that, the Windows OS, both Windows OSs have to know what the status of power is. Otherwise, that could turn into a bad situation. So the host does pass things through. Now, that being said, from a security standpoint, it's very limited, okay? So the host does pass things through to the sandbox, but there isn't much of anything going back to the host, okay? Networking was one of them, but, that's all encrypted traffic, using the networking, using RPC calls and things like that. That's not to say somebody couldn't hack it, but it's more secure than just using a port 80 or whatever. So whenever you want to just, hey, I'm done with this sandbox, you just close it. And it tells you, hey, when you do this, everything's going to die. It goes away. You get a brand new one next time you launch. Okay? So real quick, I'm going to go into that, but I'm going to show you. This is the container manager service. If you close that, if you shut that down, you can't launch any containers at all on the box, right? But also it takes away any of the layers, okay, that were created during, the process of running the sandbox or running any other Windows container. It starts out brand new, okay? And what it does is it pulls off of something called a base layer. So if we take a look inside of the folder and I'll make this big, of the Windows containers, it's program data, Microsoft Windows containers. You can see there's actually a base images folder here. That is the base image that's used. If you get in here past the GUID into the base layer and you get into files, this is the base layer that's expanded right here. This is what's put into the OS as it boots. And you can tell it's very limited. Now you can go and modify this if you like, okay? But remember, it'll always revert back to its original base layer. Okay? I don't think they have the ability yet to do custom base layers. Jeff, am I right on that? I don't think they do. I don't think they have the ability to do custom base layers yet. I don't think they allow that yet.
You can customize the XML.
Yeah.
And that's what I have.
Right.
So I can choose to do that.
Right, exactly. So you can customize the, if you will, the post install, the stuff that happens after the actual base layer lays itself down. But I don't think they allow for that customization yet. I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure on that they don't. And then what you'll have under here as well is you will have a folder called container storages. And those will be the actual VHDX files that you can see here, the Sandbox VHDX. Okay? These are part of the layers that get piled on in order to build the base image. Here you'll see layers. You go into the layers, you can see the hives. These are the actual registry hives that are brought into the layer every time it's made. So it's clean, it's pristine every time. All right. That's a little bit about the architecture. Yes, I'm sorry.
Since the active EDX files are there, are you not able to manipulate them from another?
No, the question was, are you able to manipulate the VHDX files like you would a normal Hyper-V machine or a normal virtual machine? Yes, you can. So you can actually mount them and you can manipulate them and it will retain that. The problem is that it will always go back to the original. So you need to make that like a copy. Yeah. So yes, you can do that. The problem is that it's really, the GUIDs, I don't think the GUIDs match up. So I thought there was a thing there about the GUIDs. Go ahead.
It might change on the next Windows 11 update.
Oh yeah, that's another thing. Yeah. Don't be surprised if you do something like that and then Microsoft comes along with another update to Sandbox and they change it all. They've done that, and I've had it actually wiped out. I've had a portion of mine wiped out because of that. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah. So what I want to do is I am going to showcase, and give a little love to Mr. Hicks down here. He actually created a set of configurations and things that allow for, being able to customize a sandbox. And he, put together this really great GitHub site that, has a whole bunch of the configurations, a bunch of the pre-configured installations that you can use. So I really want to call that out because he put a lot of work into that, and it's really nice the way he did it. So you can look him up on GitHub, and he's going to have that out there. But as you can see, this is just one of his configuration files, and it's just a PowerShell file. So when you launch Sandbox, you can give it a parameter, okay, and it's looking for, you launch it from what they call a WSB file. And a WSB file, Windows Sandbox, which will probably change to MSB eventually, but you launch it from a WSB file, and it has the initial configuration of the machine. And I'll bring that up real quick just so you can see it. I just have to remember where I put an MSB here. Oh, I got one in Sandbox. Here we go. We'll talk about polar proxy. And I'll make this really big. But as you can see, it's just doing a logon command, and it's actually executing. I'm sorry for the dark. I apologize. I know I'm going to get yelled at for that. Let me change my theme really quick. I don't want anybody coming after me here. What is that? Yeah. You see that? All right. Good. So as you can see, it's just doing a logon command, and then it's actually executing command.exe with a whole bunch of other stuff behind it. And you can daisy chain those commands together. So when it launches, it's going to put those layers down to the base image, and then it's going to add all this stuff. All right? But also, there are parameters that are put in the WSB file, like how much memory, if host files are shared, because you can share files between the host and the client and the Sandbox, and other settings. I don't know if I have a full one that actually outlines all of those. Let me see if my default one does. Yeah, you can see here. So I've actually got audio input, networking, video input, printer redirection. You can do that as well. Clipboard redirection, which is kind of key if you're trying to do copy and paste between the sandbox and the host. Map folders, that plays a big part, because what happens is that once the sandbox starts up, you have to establish some kind of session with that sandbox in order to push an application to it, right? That's the only way you could do it. Sandbox by default doesn't allow for RDP, so you're not going in via RDP. But what you do is you map a folder, and then you can actually take that folder as what it is on the host side, and it looks just like it does on the guest side. You can call it whatever you want. So then you're able to execute whatever, files or PowerShell scripts or whatever you have on your host that you want to add to your sandbox image. And then you'll see right there the command at the bottom. Now, obviously, you could have done the whole, kind of like a PowerShell one-liner, right? You could have done a one-liner where I showed the first one that had all those commands. Now, you can actually just put it inside of a CMD file, and it'll launch that as the same way. I do have the vGPU disabled. That's been really flaky, by the way. So if you do anything with GPU and you want to do something in the sandbox, to be honest with you, it's been hit or miss, but I also don't have an RTX card, right? So they have, NVIDIA's got a driver you can download for Windows, for the WSL and for Sandbox. I don't remember what the name of it is. But you can download that driver and it works, the RTX helps it out. I don't have a machine with RTX, so I don't know. But my little crappy Surface 6 here doesn't do so well with the virtual GPU. So hopefully you have better experience if you're using that. All right. So that is a WSB file, and then you can actually get into the command file. I'll just show one of those real quick. In the startup command. So I have one here, my startup command. And you can see what I'm doing here is I'm just installing Chocolatey. I'll go down. I'm actually looking at PowerShell, running the command to install Chocolatey, then doing a scoop. But I have them remmed out, obviously, for the demonstration. But you can get the gist of what I'm trying to do here. Install the VS Code portable, not the full VS Code. I do the portable because it's a lot faster, and I don't need to sync settings, and I don't need to sync extensions because I'm just going in there to do something and then go away. You can certainly do that if you like, but that takes longer. I actually, on the bottom, just to point that out, I actually have on the bottom, I used to do it with just vscode.dev instead of actually installing VS Code at all. So, I also do a bunch of testing when I was working on PowerShell module for Pure, the SSMS extension that we have and the SDK. So I automatically install those. So when the sandbox came up, I had a development environment that I could work with right off the bat. Didn't have to change anything. Okay. And that's kind of a key point too. I just said, I didn't have to change anything. The nice thing about it is you have host networking, right? So you have internet inside the sandbox. So if you have to go out to GitHub or you have to go out to a site to pull, something, you can do that inside the sandbox, which is convenient. Now, obviously, you can take networking away like that in that command, in that WSB file. You can actually turn off networking so you can't have internet or you can't have connectivity. So, okay. So, getting back to Jeff. He created a whole bunch of these different configurations. And what I really like about what Jeff did was he added information to them. He's very, if you ever follow Jeff and does his courses, he's very elaborate about, supplying all of the information, which is awesome. But he actually lays everything out very simplistically, and it's really easy to follow. And he also uses the burnt toast module to actually show us a notification that it's completed. Because one of the problems with Sandbox is you run all these commands, okay, or if you're installing things, and it never tells you when it's done. You don't know when it's done, doing its thing. Because most of the time the windows are in the background, and they're running as a system. So you don't know when it actually is done. So that was kind of nice. You add that little burnt toast at the end, and it helps out. The other thing is that he does things in parallel. He loves parallel jobs. Everybody should love parallel jobs in PowerShell, except when you have dependencies. That sucks, but yeah, I learned that the hard way. So yeah, this is actually what Jeff has done, and if you go out to his repo, you can download the whole thing. I've actually got a couple of here. Where's your stuff here? And that's the configs and scripts. I think this is yours, Jeff, right here. Yeah, this is him where he does his sandbox for Pluralsight, for presentations. He's got one for work, things like that. These are great templates to use. So I encourage you that. By the way, if you go out to GitHub and you do a code search in GitHub, I don't know if you do code searches in GitHub, but it's kind of cool the way it works. When you do that, you're going to find a whole bunch of stuff if you just search for .wsb. There's going to be a whole boatload of people that have WSBs out there. And they're doing all kinds of different things. So if you need something, it's kind of like a PowerShell script. Sometimes it's better to see what someone else has done to see if it's better than the way you did it, or if they can help you out with the way you did it, to take a look at what somebody else has done. So there's quite a bit out there. And you can actually borrow his scripts as well. Well, I'm telling you can. He maybe says no, but you got it all open source, right?
It's just install the module Windows Sandbox tools.
Yeah, you're right. Yep. And that actually brings me up to the next, which is the PowerShell portion of this. So if I do a get module here, you're going to see two modules that are there. You're going to see Windows Sandbox tools on the bottom, and you're going to see Sandbox above that. Now, the Sandbox module hasn't been updated since 2019. Okay, so if you want to be a little outdated, I don't know. Sandbox hasn't changed that much. But Windows Sandbox tools is actually, got what Jeff does. So if we take a look, just real quick, I want to take a look at the commands on that. And like Windows Sandbox tools, this is where you actually create a new sandbox configuration. You can, create a map folder, start the Windows Sandbox, export it, all that kind of stuff. The really cool thing that he added was the ability to add metadata to the actual sandbox. So when you go in there, it doesn't allow you to, you can call it sandbox whatever you want, file name, right? That doesn't tell you a lot. Jeff actually added the ability to add metadata. So you can, put name in there, you can put, purpose, whatever, which is really cool. Where's that stored, by the way, Jeff? The metadata? Is it? Okay. Yeah, so if you had to search for it, you can just search the XML file for it, yeah.
Well, it's an XML format as a WSB extension.
Oh, okay. I got you. So then, no, you can't. It's, go ahead. It's in it. Go ahead.
Yeah, you need to do this with the video.
Oh, okay.
Show a WSB file.
Okay. I'm doing Jeff's work for him here, that's all. Well, no, you are. Come on now. Okay, so if you wanted to add, you want to add one of your WSB files. I'm sorry. Just that?
Just, you can see that it is an XML file. That's what you need to explain.
Okay.
It's an XML format.
It's an XML format, correct. And but it's in a what file? In the WSB file, correct. Yep. All right. Now let's get on to, how much time we got? Good. Got time. And I apologize. I'm going to go over here a little bit for questions. Now, the thing I wanted to show you was, I showed this I got to close this. Sorry. I showed this in the WSL session yesterday. I'm going to show it again because right now I'm currently not running a sandbox. If I can get this cleared here. So there's a utility called HCS Diag. And if you did a question mark behind it, it's actually a container management command line for Windows containers. It's been there in Windows for a very long time. But what it does is it tells you what containers are actually running. So if I do a list here, it's going to tell me all I have is a template from the CM service. I don't have anything else. Okay, and it's just a template. It's just a save as a template, VM. So that's, if you consider it, that's your base layer. Okay, so if I spark up a container here, and once it starts up, and I go down and I do an HC Diag list again, now you're going to see the Madrid running. Okay, running in Madrid. So every time you spin up a container, you run this, you're going to be able to see the new container, number one, but you're also going to see the GUID for the container. Now, I'm sorry for the microphone hit here. The key reason why I point this out is because you're doing any automation that requires you to identify the container that you're working with, the sandbox that you're working with, you have to provide that GUID. Okay? And has anybody in here used Power Automate? You tried it? It's actually pretty cool if you haven't tried it. And running PowerShell through Power Automate in an entire flow is really kind of nice, especially when you're working with big fleets of PCs and servers and infrastructure. But inside of Power Automate, you can actually create a flow that executes sandboxes, right? But the only way that that flow understands what sandbox it is because, or what container it is, because it needs that GUID. And that's how you get it. Now, there's also something called HSN or HNS Diag. And if you do a list all here, that actually shows the networking that's used. Okay, so that's host networking service. And containers that use networking from a sandbox standpoint, obviously not because they're using host. But if you're running any other kind of containers, you can use this utility. All right. So I'm going to start up a sandbox here. I'm going to show you what happens. Oh, I got one started. Let's just use this one. Did I use a... Well, let me start a new one. So I'm starting up this sandbox 1. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start up a generic sandbox. And once I'm inside this sandbox and I have it running, I'm going to show you something that's really cool that they just came out with not too long ago. Once I get my taskbar up here, there it is. I open up Explorer. I go to the C drive. You can see it's a 40 gig C drive. It has only these folders. Remember those folders? Those were in that layer directory. That's exactly what you get. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a new folder. And I'm just going to call it demo. So now, the whole reasoning around Sandbox is when I go ahead and I click that X up in the corner, it's going to wipe it out. When it comes back up, you're not going to have that demo folder anymore, right? Well, if you're running Windows 11 at a certain build, 22H2, you have the ability to click here, and do a restart, and you will get everything back that you put into it. So we will maintain persistence. That's the first time that they've ever allowed this. Okay, so this is kind of a big deal because persistence was always a thing that they were unsure if they wanted to do. But now if you do a restart instead of an actual shutdown, you have persistence. That's why it creates another image when you do this. So now I have another set of files that it's reading off of. It's not reading off the base layer, it's reading off another set and a VHDX file. So when this opens up, we should see our demo folder on the C drive. But once again, this does require Windows 11 22H2. And, oh, there it is. Almost called me a liar. So as you can see, one of the biggest reasons they did this is because applications had installed. So as an example, I'll install Git, okay, or I'll install, Git's a bad example, but I install an application that requires a reboot, okay? That was always a big problem. So now you can actually install an application, have it reboot, okay? As long as it does a restart and not a shutdown, that application state will persist, and you'll be able to bring it back up and use it inside the sandbox. Kind of neat. I've got about 4 minutes left. I do want to show you the thing I mentioned about the users. So remember I told you WDAG utility? There's the WDAG. There's a history right there that comes through. And eventually they're going to have to change that to MDAG, but they're going to probably have to put a pointer in because it's going to screw up a lot of the stuff. Does anybody have any questions I can ask in the last 4 minutes and 18 seconds that I have? Yes.
Container host is available on server. Are there nice methods or expectations that you could ever use Sandbox on server or bring the Madrid image across the server in a not nice way?
Okay, so the question is whether or not you could use this on Windows Server, right? Officially, no. And that's just because the architecture of server, they don't want you using server for those types of purposes. That's not to say they're not going to change that. You know, to bring Madrid in, you could bring the Madrid image in as a Hyper-V because you can mount it as a disk.
Yeah.
You know, you could do that if you wanted, but it's currently right now it's not supported. It can be done. You can go out there and Google it, and you will see that there are ways to do it. But Microsoft will say, "Come on, we won't support that." See now.
My sandbox is ready.
Does anybody have any other questions? Okay. Once again, all of this code, everything that I have here and stuff that I haven't even shown, all the WSB files and all the config files will all be in the repo. So I'll put some links out there. I got like 30 different GitHub repos out there that have all this stuff in it. So I'll put all that out there. And with that, thank you very much for coming.